Very welcome to Catalonia House and to Prince Henry's Room and to another meeting of the Catalonia House Conversations. My name is Francesc, I'm the head of the delegation here in the Catalonia House, and we are very, very pleased to host you once more. So let me just very, very briefly, I see a couple of colleagues, I'm sorry, embarrassing you, but I have to introduce you. We have Kat, who is the director of the Office for Tourism, Catalan Tourism, and Mar, who is the director of the Catalan, I don't know how to translate that in English, the Catalan Institute for Cultural Industries, so the Catalan Agency for Cultural Industries. So this Catalonia House is, we host all the different agencies of the Catalan government. So we have the delegation, we have tourism, we have cultural industries, we also have the Ramon Llull Institute, which is the cultural institute, so to speak, and we have the Trade and Investment Office. All of it in this house. You're now in the Prince Henry Room. This is a 16th century room. This house survived the Great Fire of London. It is not ours. We rent it from the City of London, so it's not that, you know, the Catalan government has this kind of means. But we're very, very, very happy to be here. So the Catalan House Conversations that you're attending today, this is an effort of the Catalonia House to showcase what's Catalonia all about. So today we're going to hear about language, but we're going to have a series of conversations about different issues, health, legal issues, biotechnologies, so that the intention is to portray who we are, what we do, and the very interesting things happening back home, so that the public here in the UK, but also all of our friends, are aware of the interesting things that are happening. Two housekeeping things. First off, as you all have noticed, there is a camera there, so we're going to record this, and then we're going to put it in the website of the Ministry of Foreign Action of the Catalan government for everybody to see and to enjoy. How this is going to run, and this is my last intervention, what we're going to do today, we are very happy and very pleased to have three extraordinary people in the panel. We have John London, who's the director of the Center for Catalan Studies at Queen Mary University. We have Òscar Escuder, who is the president of Plataforma per la Llengua, which is, I think you're looking for a translation, so you'll let us know later on. And Anne Jones, the director of the Center for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies. So very, very welcome. The idea is to have around an hour of presentation discussion among them, and then we'll open for questions and debate. This is a conversation between them, so Catalonia House has no particular position on anything. This is just their own positions regarding language. Yesterday was St. David's Day. I had the privilege of attending the gala dinner in Guildhall and be surrounded by 500 amazing Welsh people that were extremely inspiring. So happy belated, thanks, St. David's Day. And I know that today at 8 o'clock there is a Barça against Madrid football. So we're gonna try to be extremely, on time. Otherwise, you have to choose between this very interesting panel or Barça. So without much ado, John, it's all yours. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I thought you were going to say Liverpool then as well, but thank you very much. Bon vespre, nice place there. Good evening, and thank you for coming along. Thank you for introducing me. I'm John London, I'm the Director of Centre for Catalan Studies, and I'm going to be introducing these two guests, these speakers, who are going to tell you about their activities and how, in a way, they are fighting for the language. I like the attempt at apoliticizing everything, Francesc, but I think we're going to enter politics, if only politics of language, very soon. The other reason, perhaps, I was chosen to present this is because, apart from trying to speak Catalan for about 30 years, I also lived in Wales for 2 years, in Swansea, Abu Dhabi, sorry, and therefore have a slight connection that's still residual with Wales. Although I was always told it was a non-Welsh speaking area, but I know I'm going to be corrected on that by Elin later. So let me introduce the two speakers. And as Francesc said, after that, I'll be talking to them, and then we'll open the floor out to everybody. So jot down your questions so you don't forget them, and you can interrupt me, but don't interrupt them, okay, while they're speaking. So first we have Òscar Escuder de la Torre, and he is, as Francesc said, the president of the Plataforma per la Llengua. So you could translate that as platform for the language, which doesn't sound very idiomatic. We've come up with what is now going to be the official translation, Alliance for the Language, which is still the idea of a group of other groups fighting for a kind of linguistic parity or the opportunity to speak the language and use the language, use the Catalan language where necessary. In fact, in his other life, he's a doctor, a surgeon, craniomaxillofacial surgeon, and also associate professor in the medical faculty of the Universitat de Gal. I have to mention something personal about his hobbies, as they sometimes do on these occasions. He's quite sporting, likes cycling. He has 3 children, but the most important here is his daughter, who is the president of the KCL, I dare mention the other college, University of London, Catalan Society, and she's here as well, so welcome. Then we have Elin Haf Gruffydd Jones, who is, has been since 2019 professor at the University of Wales, Trinity St David, and since 2021 she's been the director of the University of Wales Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies, so a research and study centre, and has taken part in various research projects, as you'd expect for somebody with those titles. But let me highlight the Catalan ones with Aureli Argemí and later Professor Xavier Vila at Barcelona University. She's published books, but perhaps most relevant for the situation here is not limited simply to English and Welsh, but also speaks French and Spanish and Galician and Basque, and whenever she can, Catalan. Did I miss any? No. No, okay. Okay, so first we're going to let Òscar describe his organisation and talk about Catalan language and the politics of Catalan language. So if we put this off, it won't send me. You better put that on. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Do we have the question? First of all, the first message I want to give to all of you, besides thanking you for coming, is if we are here, is because we are not normal citizens, so we don't have a normal situation. I guess none of us can imagine such a debate on, I don't know, Danish and Swedish or Finnish and Bulgarian languages. Maybe we could have a, well, not me, I'm not a linguist, so we could have a debate on particularities of those languages, but we wouldn't have debates on the situation of any of those languages, which have all of them less speakers, as you will see, than Catalan. So our aim is to become normal citizens with normal linguistic rights. Okay, first thing is, where is Catalan spoken? Probably you all know, but Catalan is spoken in 4 European states. It's widely known that it's spoken in Spain, in Catalonia, of course, in Valencia, Balearic Islands, the eastern strip of Aragon, as well in southern France, in northern Catalonia, which was split from South Catalonia in the 17th century, in the Italian city in Sardinia of L'Alguer, and Andorra, that's where Catalan is the only official state language, and that's where Catalan is the best, as you will see. Next one, please. In terms of size, regarding the numbers of the speakers, we have this graphic here, but there are between 6,000 and 7,000 languages in the world, and in numbers of speakers, Catalan is between the 80 and the 100. So it's not a small language as in numbers of speakers, as many times we've been told. We have different examples here, obviously, not the 6,000 or 7,000 examples. And what happens in the European Union? Well, in the European Union, there are 11 official languages with less speakers than Catalan. And of course, we don't have anything against them being official languages, but we would like Catalan to be official language of the European Union. Then now a few slides that are going to tell you how vital is Catalan, because not everything is bad. We have quite a good vitality. More than 50,000 books published in the last 5 years. That makes more than 10,000 books per year. The 27th most translated language in the world. 1,800 music albums in 1 year. Next one, please. Now we go to the Catalan schooling system, which is always under threat. Not from Catalans. Our polls demonstrate that over 80% of Catalan population likes this education system, which ensures, more or less, that finishing secondary school, everybody speaks Catalan and Spanish. Catalan is taught in 143 universities all over the world. And as you can see, Catalan students get higher marks in Spanish than the average Spanish student, even Spanish students from the monolingual areas of Spain. Just universities that teach Catalan around the world. In the UK there are 17, in Germany I think it's 19, 21 in the States, so it's more or less. Curiously, in the Spain outside of the Catalan-speaking area, there are only, I don't remember, it's 6, but I'm not sure of the figure, but less than the half of in the UK. So it seems like Catalan is more people curious about Catalan in the UK than in the rest of Spain, or in Germany, or in the States, for instance. Next one, please. More data on our language vitality. 72% of Catalans listen radio in Catalan, and this figure is growing. You see, from 64 to 72, and the TV, public TV, has the highest TV audience in Catalonia. In general, we can say that newcomers, migrants, want to learn Catalan. We have several data showing it. In some areas, like in new technologies, we're more or less quite good. So most of the smartphones sold are available in Catalan, the operative systems. 9 out of the 10 most visited websites have their versions in Catalan as well. Wikipedia in Catalan is a very good one. It was the third one in being started. But the second one in having articles, I think it was the German one that was opened for a while, but with no articles. So Catalan had the second articles, was the second version of the Wikipedia with open articles. Next one, please. Catalan is the official language of Barcelona, we were talking before, since more than 100 years. And it's an interesting figure. You see 8 million followers of the Catalan account, Twitter account of FC Barcelona, which makes of 80% of Catalan speakers should be Twitter followers of, I don't know, something is, I don't understand why so many people, or people who doesn't speak Catalan, I don't understand, but that's the figure. Next one, please. Now, some famous Catalan speakers, you know Pep Guardiola, you know that one is Gaudí, Rosalia, Marcelo Dureda, a famous Catalan writer, and Montserrat Caballé. Next one, please. This one is Dr. Tureta. I deeply admire him. Besides being a great orthopedic surgeon, a great scientist, discovered and did research on blood circulation in the kidneys, so he did a lot of medical work. Some of them still we're using it. And because of the Spanish War, he immigrated to the UK, he went to Oxford, and he wrote a great book on history of Catalonia. Great because of the importance, but short. If you have the chance, I do recommend it. It's The Spirit of Catalonia, and it's very nice to read. It's just short, it's 150 pages, and I do recommend it if you have the chance. And these are people who came from abroad, but became Catalan speakers as well. This first one became president of our government in 2006, I think, till 2010. He was from southern Spain, the same as Pablo Picasso, that spent a few years in Barcelona beginning of last century, and he spoke Catalan. Andrés Iniesta, you probably all know him. And this lady in the bottom, she's Benedetta Tanyabue. She was the wife of the architect who did the building of the Scottish Parliament, Enric Miralles, who died a few years ago. And she's Italian. Next one, please. So until now I have explained you quite nice things about Catalan, so where is the problem? No, the problem is that we have a vital language, but in an hostile environment. As I was telling you before, we don't have a normal situation. This picture is the cover of a report we handed over the experts of the Council of Europe, who checked how the member states who had ratified the Charter for the European Regional and Minority Languages, how the states were fulfilling the accomplishment of this charter. And this was in the case of a trial in court, that the judge told the man who was there to be judged that he had to speak Spanish or the trial was cancelled. Next one, please. So what happens to our linguistical rights? So we go back to the first thing I told you. We're not in a normal situation. We don't have the same linguistical rights as other speakers of other languages have. In Spain, we have some linguistical rights, but as I just told you, not to the same level as speakers of Spanish. In France, no linguistical rights at all. In Andorra, yes, in Andorra we're fine. And in Italy, just a few years ago, the Sardinian parliament passed a law promoting the teaching in Catalan, but it's going very slow, because this was 4 years ago, this law passed in the Sardinian parliament. But it might be that next school year, it's going to be the first year in which it's going to be implemented. And we have the law, so this is a positive issue, but also it has had quite a lot of pressure from Catalan-speaking families in L'Alguer, who pushed their municipality to do something about the law. That what is written was very nice, but we wanted to be put in practice. And this happens to us quite a lot of times, that we have a law which says that we have lots of rights, and when we go down to the earth, not in the books, not in the laws, reality is not exactly that one. Next one, please. Here you see this picture, it explains in colors what I just told you. The orange areas, that's northern Catalonia, the eastern strip of Aragon, and L'Alguer, no linguistical rights at all. The red areas, we have theoretically the same linguistical rights. On practice, that's not true at all. And on blue, there, Andorra, small one. there we're fine. So that's the situation we have regarding linguistical rights right now. Okay, well, the same, and in the bottom you see that because Andorra is the member state of the United Nations, that's why in the General Assembly of the United Nations, Catalan can be used while in our parliaments, in any other state parliament except for Andorra, obviously, Catalan cannot be spoken. Bit data on northern Catalonia. Again, what people would like is not exactly what is happening. We have this, go back please. 76% of people want more Catalan at school, while only, now it's a bit higher, because this was, but it's not, it's between 20 and 25% of northern Catalan children who's having some Catalan school. And this sometimes means as little as 1 or maybe 2 hours a week. So it's not having the school in Catalan. Some of them have, but this is only 6-7%, something like that. And even though you see this 72% of citizens in northern Catalonia support that Catalan would be official there. And this is not our data, that is the Institut Français d'Opinion Publique, so it should be reliable. In Durangué, you see that I told you that the law was passed in 2018, giving rights in education, rights in front of the administration, and it's going slowly, but it looks that we're advancing, we're going forward a little bit. Again, we're complaining that we don't have the same rights. Catalan is not official at the state level, and that gives us quite important consequences. Next one. This is what I was telling you before, that the European Charter for Regional and Minority Language is not fully observed, and even more than not being fully observed, this charter, Spain ratified it about 20 years ago, I don't remember, but 20 years ago, and the experts checked the observation that the states do every 4, 5, 6 years, and you could take the last report or the first one and doing photocopies, because it's going the same. So Spain is not improving at all regarding justice administration, civil servants, obligations to and any civil servant depending on the Spanish administration working in Catalan-speaking territories, they are not obliged even to understand Catalan language. So it's not very logical. Next one, please. In the judiciary, one of our weakest points, where we have only about 6% of rulings of the courts are in Catalonia, and that's where it's the most, except Andorra again. So in the Balearic Islands, Valencia, maybe it's 2-3%. So it's not according to the importance of the language in the country. Next one. As I told you already. Next one. Go back, please, a moment. Sorry. Yeah. We have a department for citizens when they have linguistic discrimination that they can bring it to us, and we assess and try to help whenever we can. And you see that from 2007 to 2018, we had 158. Until the end of last year, we have 460. So it has increased quite a lot. This is due to 2 reasons. One reason is that people is more conscious of his rights, but as well that we as an organization, we have worked more, we are more known, and people knows more of this service we have, and when something happens, they come to us and tell us, I have had this or that problem. Next one, please. Well, this is, I told you, we cannot speak Catalan in the Spanish Parliament, in the European Parliament, but due to Andorra, we can speak Catalan in the United Nations General Assembly. Just this week on Tuesday, I think it was blatant manipulation of the in the European Parliament of the Petitions Committee, which is chaired by a member of the Partido Popular, Spanish Partido Popular, which is conservative against any other language which is not Spanish, and well, talking on how discriminated the Spanish speakers are in the Catalan education system. And, well, I don't know how many of you are Catalan, how many of you are British, but I can assure to the British, the Catalans already know, that if you find somebody in Catalonia that doesn't speak a language, this language is not Catalan, it's not Spanish, it's Catalan. So what needs to be reinforced in teaching is Catalan in order that everybody speaks the two languages. But if somebody tells you otherwise, he's lying. That's no doubt about it. Next one, please. Well, our complaint about not being official in the European Union. Very important on this because is that not being official in the European Union, it's not only that our representatives cannot speak Catalan in the European Parliament, that is important, but not so much. The real importance of that, the most important consequence of that, there are more, but not to be too long, is that there are lots of European laws and regulations that oblige to do whatever they are related with, usually with the consumers, in official languages of the European Union. That in practice means that not being official of the European Union, when one of these laws, and last year, only in 2022, there were 47 laws of the European Parliament obliging to do whatever it was in official languages of the European Union. This in practice means putting difficulties to use Catalan in our territory, in the place where it should be used, where it should be spoken. So it's not that our politics can speak that is as well, but it's not the big thing. The big thing is not being official means less use in city. Next one. Well, other consequences. Next one. Now, very shortly, because I don't know how I'm going on time. Only 1 minute. So very shortly, I'm going to tell you what Plataforma per la Llengua, what Alliance for the Language, as we are translated, we're doing. As I told you at the beginning, we want to be normal citizens. It's that easy. The same as Danish or Swedish or Bulgarian with languages with less speakers than Catalan can do. We want to do the same as they can. Nothing more, nothing less. So we work in all the Catalan-speaking area in the 4 states. So we have, this year it's going to be our 30th anniversary. We have 26,000 members, and as far as we know, we are the largest NGO, largest organization in the world working only in language. There are other cultural associations or cultural NGOs much larger than, but only in language. As far as we know, we are the largest in the world. Next one. Next one. Next one. So I wanted to get to this slide. We work mainly in 3 aspects. We do our job as a lobby, so we try to be at the beginning of legislative procedures, and the earlier the better we can tell the politicians what we think it should be regarding we only take care of the language. Any other aspect, we don't talk about it. We work, so we try to make the situation the more favorable for Catalan language and Catalan speakers, and obviously as the earlier we know what the law is going to say, we can pressure earlier in the process of the, I don't know how to say that in English, how the law develops from the first talks between different political parties to the moment that it's passed the parliament. We work on public awareness. We try to make people aware of everything which is not normal and how it should be. And we offer services to anybody who needs and asks us services regarding language, like sometimes companies come to us and tell us how to improve their whatever, either internal communication, advertising, websites, external communication, etc., regarding language. Next one. Well, and we work in, well, we could say more or less everywhere, because language is more or less everywhere, but especially in administrations, in the judiciary, the business world, and in the international institutions, obviously in the European institutions, as I repeatedly said. How we try to make general public more aware of how things should be with everything, events. For instance, last year we did for first time a big fair on video games in Catalan, and that was a big success. We had, even before doing this fair, we had enterprises who were not doing any video game in Catalan, telling us that for next year, so this year, 2023 we are now, they would do their video games in Catalan in order to be able to come to our video game fair, because it was a big success. We had plenty of people. So all these kind of things, we try to make people realize that they should use more Catalan, and that whenever it's not possible, that's not a normal situation. The services we offer to administrations, enterprises, etc.
It was a long minute, but it was worth it. I'm sorry to hurry you on, but we want time for everything. Ellen, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Now.
Ok, grec, diolch yn fawr iawn. Wel, abans de començar la presentació, jo no tinc ninguna presentació, disculpa. Vull agrair la delegació del govern de la Generalitat al Regne Unit i a Irlanda per la invitació per participar en la Catalania House Conversations aquest vespre. I és un gran honor i un plaer enorme, i sobretot estar aquí amb vosaltres a l'endemà del dia de Sant David de Gales. Felly, eisiau dweud rhyw ddiolch bach yn Gatalaneg ac yn Gymraeg rwan cyn cychwyn. Achos mae'r digwyddiad yma hefyd yn cael ei hyrwyddo fel rhan o wythnos Cymru yn Llundain. And I'm just thinking now how many people in this room who are not Welsh would have been able to recognise Welsh as what I was speaking just now, without the context of where we are. And I'm thinking that's a little bit, when we start to think about it, it's a little bit strange really that, Welsh is spoken as an everyday language just a few hours up the road, if you like, and yet so little is known about it today. In the rest of the state, if you like. And if we were to go back about 4 centuries, 390 years to be precise, in this very spot really, in Fleet Prison, as it was known at the time. I don't know, I don't think it was this actual building, but I think it's just a few 100 metres round the corner. Then we would have come across a Welshman called John Jones of Gelli Lyfdy. Gelli Lyfdy was his home in the northeast of Wales, which is where I'm from, and he was in prison very often because he wasn't very good with his money. He was very often in prison because of debts, but as a result of being imprisoned because of his threats, and his great interests were that he was a scribe and he was a lexicographer, he was a lawyer by training, and he was an antiquarian. And so while he was in prison, he always produced Welsh lexicon about all parts of life, agriculture, crafts and so on. And I mentioned this now, he developed around 7,000 7,000 words in his lists, if you like. And I mentioned this now because a colleague of mine at the University World Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies has just published a book about him and his contribution to Welsh lexicography. So I mention it not just as a plug for one of my colleagues' books, and the book is actually coming out very shortly, it's not quite yet published, and it'll be published in Welsh, and we have a substantial academic tradition where we use the language for publications and so on. But I mention it also because I think that it's indicative of the long history of the Welsh language and its presence here in London, but also its presence as a literary language, as a language of knowledge, as a language of dictionaries, lexicon and so on, and that this kind of sort of low gentry, if you like, people in that period in the 16th and in the 17th century, they were already bilinguals in a way, or very often trilinguals, and that they were able to maintain those two languages, or those three languages, though they didn't very often speak Latin, but that they were able to maintain Welsh and English as languages of scholarly work. So I was just bringing that up as well, because I think that perhaps we might go on to consider things like personal bilingualism, societal bilingualism, and so on as we discuss Welsh and Catalan today. So I just wanted to think of that because I'd been, it was just a coincidence that Geirfaoedd Fflyd, the Fleet vocabularies, if you like, is going to be published, and we were here in Fleet Street this evening. But if we think about Welsh today, we can look at the picture in a very sort of positive or optimistic way. We can project it as a success story, or we can look at things in a more pessimistic way, if you like, and think of it as a series of misfortunes, but also of missed opportunities. And between that period where our friend John Jones Getty Loveday was in prison and where we are today, a number of huge events happened which changed the course of the Welsh language. The Industrial Revolution contributed to its initial success as a contemporary urban language of working classes and increased literacies and so on. And then, as we move into the 20th century, then we can see a history of decline in the numbers of speakers and in the percentage across Wales, linked to the kinds of linguistic discrimination that you've been alluding to, Òscar. Also, the connection between social aspiration and monolingualism within the state. And I'm sure that there are many other factors as well. And the challenges that the language faces today, we've just had the results of the 2021 census in the UK, and the language figures for Welsh in Wales show that there's been a slight decline in the number and in the percentage of speakers. So instead of being at around 562,000 speakers as we were 10 years ago, so in that 500,000 mark, we are 20,000 or 22,000 fewer. So again, around that same mark. And the percentage has dropped from just under 20% to now 1 in every 6, so around 17 point something %. So those make a kind of headlines that, you know, we're not making any progress at all. If we take another source of quantifiable data about knowledge of the language, if we use the annual population survey on the other hand, then we can see that there's huge growth that's taking place in that same period of time. Or rather that instead of the figure hovering around the 500,000 mark, then the annual population survey suggests that the figure is closer to 900,000. So clearly there is, and also for the first time, the annual population survey projects the figures going into one direction. So the annual population survey increases the number of speakers over 10 years, and then the census follows another trajectory, so it decreases the number of speakers over 10 years. So what do we know about the future, or what's happened over the past 10 years in terms of development of the Welsh language? Well, even if the figures are telling us, according to the census, that the number of speakers has gone down, and we look in more detail, the census tells us that there are 5% fewer people between 3 and 15 years old who are able to speak Welsh. Yet, if we look at the schools data, more kids or pupils are in Welsh medium education or in bilingual models of education. So, were we over-reporting the number of speakers in the past? And are we now levelling it out a little bit? Is it also the case, and of course Welsh, as you heard and as you already knew, you know, it's not a mutually intelligible language with English unless I start swearing or asking for a taxi very loudly. But, you know, so it's the threshold level, and I suppose that this is also the case in languages like Catalan, where there is a close proximity to the neighbouring or the dominant language. You know, what constitutes the meaning, do my kids speak Welsh? I mean, if I speak Welsh to them then, and they answer me in Welsh, I mean, I think we can say that's a yes. But if I don't speak Welsh myself, how do I know whether my kids speak Welsh or not? Well, if they go to Welsh medium, I'm presuming that they speak Welsh. If they don't go to Welsh medium and that they go to English medium education, which is the case for about 75% of the children in Wales at the moment, though there are plans to change that, then the threshold that the parents apply, perhaps, has changed over time. Because if we think of what's happened over the past decade, and then, you know, Òscar, with all his stats, I don't even have a presentation. Even if I had a presentation, I wouldn't be able to compete with the number of books published in Catalan every year and so on. But we have one trick up our sleeves, let's not forget. So over the past 10 years, one of the major things that's happened, I'll go on to the serious major thing in a minute, but what's happened over the past 10 years, of course, we've had the huge success of the internationally recognised official Welsh football team, something that you don't have on your slides or anywhere. No, we don't, no. But clearly, having the presence of the Welsh language on that international level, more recently, you know, perhaps we don't want to remember the football, but we might want to remember the first press conference at a World Cup where Welsh was spoken and so on. We know that there's much more engagement with the Welsh language over the past decade through people who don't necessarily speak the Welsh language. We know that when we go to see Wales play football, that there's more and more singing in Welsh, more and more understanding of Welsh, more and more use of Welsh in the stadium to call the numbers of the players and so on, using only Welsh rather than Welsh and English, or as it was before, English only. So what's happened over the past 10 years in a more serious way is that with the same thing happened to us 10 years ago when we had the census results, and we put a lot of importance on the census results. The same thing happened to us 10 years ago. We lost about 20,000 speakers. So we went down from 580 something down to 560 something thousand. But a group of us, more than one person in this room, decided, look, this isn't, we can't just become depressed about this. We need to change the narrative. And we actually decided that we would put it to our advantage as activists now. That we wouldn't just think, oh, isn't it a shame? If we could have only had 20,000 more speakers, everything would have been okay. We could have all been positive and everything. What we decided to do in 2011, or 2012, after the results came out then, was we decided, look, we need to change the narrative. We need to change the game. We need to use management speak even. So that is where the million Welsh speakers by 2050 came from, because we decided it's not good enough to be hovering around that 500,000 when we are a population of 3 million. We need to have a game changer. We can't just use the same narratives and expect something different to happen. And that started as a Cymdeithas campaign. It then went into the political parties' manifestos, and then by 2016, after the Welsh election, it then became part of Welsh government policy from 2017 onwards. So what's happened there is that the Welsh language now has become a reality for more people than what it previously was. On the other hand, is it a strong vernacular day-to-day language for many parts of Wales? Is it in some parts of Wales, is it more a network language, and in other parts of Wales is it more a community language? We've seen growth in the number of speakers in Cardiff, but at the same time we've seen a decline in the number of speakers in areas like Carmarthenshire or the western areas. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Welsh has been adopted properly as a national language once again. It tells us also that we need to really focus on adjusting perhaps a little bit of our language policy and of our language on our priorities, because very often when we give talks about Welsh, we're usually comparing Welsh with Basque because of the demographic similarities, because of this idea of 3 million and, you know, a language that's quite distinctive from the dominant languages and so on. A language that can be both, you know, very fashionable and completely, you know, not fashionable at the same time, depending who speaks it and so on. You know, a language of hip-hop and betsolari or anything and what have you in between, you know. But of course, when we talk about Welsh and the Basque Country, Wales and the Basque Country, we always have to remember that in Spain, at least, perhaps not in France, but in Spain, the Basque Country has a very high GDP in comparison to many other parts of the country, whereas in Wales, and especially in the areas that are traditionally Welsh-speaking, the GDP is lower. So unless we tackle out-migration from largely rural or non-urban areas, unless we tackle over-centralisation of the economy, then we won't be able to sustain Welsh as a day-to-day language in many of the communities where it has been traditionally spoken. And I know that there are areas in Cardiff where there are some neighbourhoods where we're getting up to about 34%, which is kind of double the national average if we look at the census data. But at what point do communities become vehicles in themselves for language reproduction? Does that happen? And I'm really interested in looking as well in more detail at the Basque Country, especially in areas. Okay, we all know that Gasteiz or Vitoria, we know that there is growth in the number of Basque speakers who live there. Some of them have moved from other places where, you know, maybe they've moved from Azpeitia, Ascoitia, those kinds of places. Some of them have been brought up in Gasteiz. But if we look at other areas as well, where the language was lost, in the case of the Basque Country centuries ago, in the case of Wales not so long ago, in the case of Wales we're looking at perhaps a century ago, or 150 years ago, or something like that. So what's the mechanism to reproduce the language in societal terms in those areas? I was talking to Ricard earlier about Belfast and so on, you know. So, John, you said, you know, Swansea is not a Welsh-speaking place. So I'm trying to sort of weave my way to get to respond to that. So we have been thinking of places as non-Welsh speaking. We have been thinking, you know, people would say, oh, Merthyr Tydfil, that's not very Welsh speaking. You know, a relative of mine, he doesn't speak Welsh himself, brought up in Merthyr Tydfil, a journalist, ended up being a sports editor for the Daily Telegraph, but there we go. And he was saying, in the 1950s, there were areas of Merthyr Tydfil that were Welsh speaking, you know, so when we think of Swansea, maybe it was only at the beginning of the 20th century where the vernacular language of Swansea was changing to English and so on. But we know that the valleys and the industrial areas around Swansea itself were very Welsh speaking up until, you know, maybe 70, 80 years ago. So I'm really interested when we look at language revitalisation, language recuperation, and also in my role as president of ELN, the European Language Equality Network, that deals with languages sort of big and small, even though we're not supposed to say small languages. There are only languages with small numbers of speakers. The language itself is not small, and taking that from an Icelandic poet called Sion. But so even when we look at large numbers of languages with large numbers of speakers, with small numbers of speakers, languages with a lot of legal provision and a lot of investment, and then languages with far fewer, then as people who are concerned about with language and as activists, and we have to accept that we have to be activists to a certain degree, otherwise we will just relinquish that responsibility to make sure that for future generations that they have a linguistic base to work from. So as we work across languages, I'm really interested to hear what can a language like Welsh learn from the Catalan experience, because it's not just about the numbers, is it? It's about the mentality, and it's about a way of seeing the world. And I'm also interested in learning what a language like Welsh can learn from languages that are less powerful, if you like, or that have a lower level of linguistic vitality. So I'll stop there. I didn't look at the time, so I have no idea if I've spoken for 20 minutes, but I'll stop there. But thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We're slightly overrunning, so I'll cut what I have to say to stimulate a discussion to about 10 minutes. As I say, you can interrupt me. Let me declare a personal interest here. One of the languages I try to speak doesn't have a country, doesn't have a state, and never has had a state, never will, namely Yiddish. And you talk about Merthyr Tydfil. Actually, there was a lot of Yiddish spoken in Merthyr Tydfil around the time when there was a lot of Welsh spoken in Merthyr Tydfil, which is quite interesting because I used to know some of those people who came and then ended up in Swansea, of course. And the reason I say that as a kind of stimulus is to declare a vested interest, but also because you mentioned very importantly the fact we're in between, what is it now, you're the linguist, 6,400 languages, there's one disappearing every 2 weeks. Of course, there are not as many countries, so there are very, very many countries. The majority of languages spoken don't have countries, they don't have that support. We talk about a legal system within a language, they don't have all of that. So the first question, I suppose, as a provocation is to say, so what? You know, so what? You don't have, what do you want to do in the language? You want to talk in the language? You want to play football in the language? You want to speak to your children? Speak to your children in the language. You know? Do you want to write in the language? Write in the language. Do you want to publish in the language? Who's preventing you from publishing in the language? You were touching on so many things that were social status, which you can also say, perhaps more in the País Valencià, in Valencia, than you can in Barcelona. The total opposite of why people started speaking Spanish and forgetting or unlearning Valencià, Catalan, was because it wasn't in the social interest to. It became the growth of the Catalan bourgeoisie. It means you speak Catalan with the Catalan bourgeoisie. Whatever, in a sense, whatever your politics, really. In Valencia, it wasn't that. And then you talk about money. You need the money for that. So you need the money, and that's something very different in a way. It's connected, but the money therefore makes the language. So I say, because you've got such, in a way, contrasting situations, you're complaining about not being able to speak in a court. If only, how many courts are there in Welsh?
Well, you can speak in a court.
With interpreter?
Yeah, you can't have a Welsh-speaking jury at the moment.
You can't have a Welsh-speaking jury? Right.
Not at the moment.
Sure, what is...
No, I don't think you can.
Sure, I wasn't...
You can have an interpreter, you can have a...
Yeah, you can have a selected Welsh-speaking
Oh yeah, with a jury, sorry, yeah.
jury.
So the jury...
You can't have a Welsh, but you can speak Welsh in a court where there's no jury.
Yeah.
Without translation.
Without translation, yeah.
Well,
So
if everybody understands it.
Oh, you have to ask before?
Yeah.
You see.
Well, yes. Or it can happen, because we're a little bit, perhaps, less formal about these things than you are, and also we have a law that allows you to speak Welsh in court, going back to 1942.
I don't think it's a matter of formality. I come back to what I first said. I just want to have the same rights as Danish, for instance, or a Finnish. If a Danish goes to court, he will speak Danish. So why I cannot speak Catalan? Or I have to have any special situation that makes me a second-class citizen. I'm not going to accept that in any way. It's as easy or as complicated.
Isn't it about the organisation of the legal and the judiciary in Spain, and that it is not, if it were decentralised, if it were part of the competencies of the Catalan autonomous regions?
Yeah, probably, but well, it doesn't matter. Whoever has the competence, so the Catalan regional government or the Valencian, they are supposed to treat the best for the citizens, but the Spanish government is as well supposed to give us the best. And the Spanish government is not treating us as first-class citizens, so that's what I cannot accept at all.
So you got here in London.
And I put the example of the judiciary, but the same happens for the Spanish police or for any other Spanish administration. Of course, going down to the regional administrations, those ones have the linguistical requirement for their people, which is not always applied, but at least in law, is what I was telling before, that sometimes you have laws very nice that says that all doctors, for instance, or all nurses, or all civil servants in whatever field working in the Catalan or Valencian or Balearic administrations must speak, not only understand, but those must speak as well Catalan, and it's not happening. The law says that we should, but that's not the truth.
Yeah.
So, but again, the police, depending on Spain, they are not obliged even to understand. So it's all this kind, not only the judiciary, everything depending on directly on the Spanish administrations. If you want the data, a few years ago we did a study, and all the Spanish civil servants, there were only 2 which were obliged to speak Catalan, and those were the ones taking care of the relationship between the central Spanish government with the Valencian government. And this just 2, but they were based in Madrid. So the only 2 Spanish civil servants obliged to speak Catalan were based in Madrid. That was 5-6 years ago, and things haven't changed much since then.
But, you know, the point you were making earlier, John, about, you know, you've got all kinds of things, you know, and what's the relationship between having a language and then having a state or having a, you know, sub-state organization, if you like, or a sub-state level of institutionalization and so on. I mean, it's no coincidence, is it, that the 20th century, where life has become more institutionalized, it's no coincidence that also languages and linguistic diversity is being lost at a rate probably that we've never seen before, you know. And it is also part of, you know, as we have to recognize that there are challenges around global warming, about the climate crisis, about people having to be moved from their territories or very often against their wishes, capitalism going into communities and, you know, taking land off people and so on. And also our lives become much more sort of regulated through our engagement with various parts of the state or various parts of institutionalization, you know. I mean, we can talk to the people that we know using whichever language that we want, but the minute we start talking to them through, you know, devices and so on, then we're placed in language-framed communication, aren't we? And then, unless your language has access to digital building blocks and language technology, then your language becomes more difficult for you to use rather than easier for you to use. And I think that even without having a substantial state, Catalan and Welsh have both been able to invest, at least to some degree, in that information technology that's really required for any contemporary language today.
That's a basic point. But this, I don't think it depends on whether you have a state or not. Obviously, at least in our case, having a state would improve the rules, theoretically, at least everybody assumes that. But what it really makes a difference is what kind of public policies you have, regardless who is doing these public policies. In our case, if the Spanish or the French or the Italian government were doing correct public policies for Catalan, then Catalan language would be out of the question of whether we want an independent state or not. But obviously that's not the case. So, and as an example that public policies work, Andorran government, it's doing really linguistic public policies since not very long ago, since 10, 15 years at the most. And in this short period of time, because for languages this is a short period, the figures are I don't remember now, but the situation of Catalan and Andorra, it's improved a lot in regarding language use at work, language of identification, first language, and that proves that public policies work. If you do it in the correct way, they work correctly, and if you do it in the wrong way, they work wrong for the language. So work whatever way you do the policies. So.
Yeah, but that's with the government over control, direct control, in an independent way. So it's not really a fair comparison.
Yeah, but we have, for instance, as well, the case of, well, in Catalan there is the situation that at the moment what is under somehow debate is whether Catalonia becomes someday an independent state or not, but that's not the complete area, Catalan-speaking area. So that would improve the situation, obviously of a substantial part of the territory, but not of the whole territory. And many times we put the example of Ireland. Ireland is an independent state, but Irish is not a very spoken language. So having an independent
be careful
state,
that Irish speakers here.
Having an independent state, it's not a magic stuff that you have to done everything. So then this independent state has to do against the correct public policies for improving of the situation.
I think one of the things that's interesting about looking at language planning, language policies, the implementation, the results and so on in society now, especially where you've got quite progressive language policies.
Sorry, what does progressive mean?
Progressive, doing things in order to help things, to sustain linguistic diversity, rather than doing things in order to reduce linguistic diversity, I'd say so.
Promote lesser spoken languages?
Well, yeah, in our cases, to make sure that people have access to, let's say, education in a way that will allow you to leave school being able to speak, in our case, Welsh and English, hopefully other languages as well, but in our case at least Welsh and English. We know that there's been a very successful education policy for, well over a century in order to reduce pupils' capacity in the Welsh language, So that's, I think it's interesting to see what the results are, because it's not about stepping back in time, is it? It's not about recreating a past. It's not about recreating a community, be it urban or rural, where, everybody spoke language X all the time and they couldn't speak any other language, because this was the reality for most of the population of Wales in the 19th century, that they didn't speak English. They spoke Welsh and that was it, So now we're trying to recreate a vitality for the language. We want to make it available to everybody. We want everybody really to be able to leave school speaking both languages. But we know that even if our figures are rising, if we decide to believe the annual population survey, we know that it's happening in a bilingual environment, don't we? So we know that the speakers will continue to be, will continue to be, in your case, Spanish speakers or Italian speakers or French speakers, and in our case as well, the speakers will be English speakers as well. So it means that we need to create also an affinity, not just a knowledge of the language, but an affinity with the language, or a way in which you think that you can be yourself in a different way in that language. I mean, it was quite interesting for me before we started this talk, looking at different people looking at the same persons but speaking different languages, looking at Ricard speaking Catalan, John speaking Catalan and so on. And we are slightly different people, aren't we, when we speak a different language. So I'm just wondering, to what extent is it an issue in Catalonia where, especially in Catalonia, but also in the Valencian country and other areas where Catalan is spoken, to what degree is there a sense of identity, affinity, claiming the Catalan language as your main language, even though you know other languages as well?
It's quite diverse. The areas where more Catalan is spoken, obviously, even for people who doesn't speak Catalan, wherever, either in Barcelona or, for instance, in northern Catalonia, where Catalan is less spoken on all the Catalan-speaking areas. Having the language, even if you're not a speaker of Catalan, gives you a sense of identity and being of a community, which is different from your neighbor. Doesn't mean being better, but different. And the areas where Catalan is more spoken is in the areas La Regió de l'Ebre, and in a part in the Valencian country, in Gandia, Alzira, all that area is where. So this is where Catalan is more spoken. It's about 75 to 80% of people has Catalan as the first language with family, friends, at work, etc.
Yeah.
And one thing, I have a question for you, because I don't know if I didn't understand, but At the beginning, I understood that you said that Welsh people was bilingual since 300 years ago, something like that, and now you said that...
Yeah, okay, I'll explain, yeah.
Class.
Class, that's the answer. The sort of, the
literate, higher
the
class were
literate,
bilingual?
yeah,
Okay, so that's
yeah,
more or
yeah.
less the same for
Yeah.
us. Now, in our case, another thing I would like to say, because it's as well a myth, lie, that has been told many, many times, that Spanish has been in the Catalan-speaking area since lots of centuries, since, I don't know, since the dinosaur time. Sometimes it's come close to that. That's not true. Recently has been studied with people which in 2015, 2016 were over 90 years old. There was a study on 100 of them asking about the language of parents and grandparents. So we go back with that till half of the 19th century, and the result was as clear as 97% of grandparents of these people were monolingual in Catalan. So only the rich people, the more literate, were able to speak Spanish. And I can just, to my personal experience, one of my grandparents came from Aragon, not from the Catalan-speaking area, 1926, and he told me, he came to Barcelona, not to a small village in the Pyrenees, or to Barcelona, and he told me I had to learn Catalan because that was what everybody was speaking. That was less than 100 years ago. And more recently, I read a book, Memories of a Northern Catalan man who became a teacher in the French schooling system. He was born in 1914. This one, he was born in a small village, but when he went to school, when he was 5 or 6 years old, so 1920, 1919, was the first time he heard French. So we're saying that 100 years ago, the whole Catalan-speaking area, people was practically monolingual in Catalan, except for the more literate or people who were businessmen or whatever.
Okay, thanks. Let's open this up then to the floor. If you have any questions, please put your hand up. Ask. Yes, please.
I have a question. Do you feel that if you were to go in front of a judge and you chose to speak Catalan, you would feel that they would give you a word sentence? You know, I have a cousin who was a policeman, and he told me when I was a lot younger, never ever ever demand your rights about the Welsh language, because you will be there for much longer. Because they will make a point. If you're making a point, they're going to make a point. Do you feel that would happen if you chose to speak Catalan in a case?
And unfortunately, two answers. Unfortunately, unless the judge is Catalan speaker, we have as well some Catalan speaker judges, the answer would be yes. But not only that, we have some polls on lawyers, and about 70%, I don't know if 70 or 75, but most of them, during his work, have felt pressure not to use Catalan. So it's, and that's data the lawyers give us in a poll. So it's not only my impression or many citizens who are not first-hand related with justice impression, but lawyers' impression.
Silly words. And coming from the lowest ones in Valley, I know what it's like.
Sorry, thank you. And another question there?
I don't think I need the mic, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm fine. If people can't hear me, let me just say, hi, I'm David Williams. I'm former vice chair of Cymdeithas y Iaith Gymraeg, which is a Welsh language society. We do a similar thing to yourselves. We lobby government. We have endless boring meetings with government officials and stuff. But we also use like civil disobedience and non-violent protest as well to try and increase people's rights in a language. one of the interesting things to me is a thing about legislation and the effectiveness of legislation, like you were saying. And we have now got in Wales what they call the Welsh language standards, which theoretically give us rights. Like you can go to the doctor and you can speak Welsh to the doctor, and you can go to other people and speak Welsh to them theoretically. If you try and do it, it's a very different thing.
Sorry, so how does that work with interpreter if the doctor doesn't speak Welsh then?
No, it doesn't really work like that. They just say we haven't got a Welsh-speaking doctor, so crack on in English kind of thing. But I'm not against legislation, because I've spent years campaigning for legislation. I was arrested for chaining myself to the Welsh Minister's office, not my own, for legislation. So I've been campaigning for it for years, but I kind of come in now more to the mind that it takes a lot more than legislation to change things, and it takes the will of people to want to do things as well. And the whole conversation's been really interesting to me. Oh God, what time's the Bastard game? Is it 8? And I got, but it's also because one of our big campaigns now is Addysg Gymraeg i bawb, Welsh language for everybody. So we try to make sure that every child has Welsh language education, because at least then we know, that everybody will be able to speak Welsh. People who don't think Welsh education is fair because children won't speak English are talking rubbish, because English is everywhere and you can't avoid it. So I think, it's now more about, people wanting to use it, really. And I've seen with my own son, he had a long period of not wanting to use the language because it wasn't cool, he couldn't see it on Instagram, it wasn't on Snapchat at the time, all that stuff. But now he's in his early 20s, he's rediscovering the language and realising the cultural significance of it, and that it's a central part of his identity, and I haven't got a question, but anyway, thanks.
but what you say is great, because it allows me to...
Thanks, I'm prompting you.
Got to a point that is very important. I passed quite fast when I did my speech, but people consciousness is very, very important. Actually, recently I have said several times, if I could choose just one thing to happen to Catalan language, that would be that Catalan speakers don't change the language when somebody addressed to them in Spanish, because this would change everything else. Because our data say that about 80% of Catalan speakers change language to Spanish when someone addresses to them in Spanish. And that I can tell you because it's over 40 years that I'm not doing it, and I don't have any problem. Virtually everybody understands you, except in northern France and Londres sometimes. But except if you live in one of those areas, you can go to Valencia, you can go to the Balearic Islands, speak obviously in Catalonia, speak in Catalan, and you will have one problem a year at the most. And so that's to confirm. But one thing doesn't take out the importance of the other. I think both are important. But if I could choose one, and that one to happen, really, I would choose this one, that Catalan speakers wouldn't change language when somebody addresses to them in Spanish.
I think also the point that David makes about legislation is in the Welsh context as well, is that when the so-called assembly at the time was created, in the first elections were in 1999, there had been a previous Welsh Language Act that had been passed by the UK Parliament in 1993, which had been passed by a UK Parliament with a Conservative majority, and generally we don't send a Conservative majority to the UK Houses of Parliament, haven't done ever, and not looking likely either. So, of course, it was quite important for Welsh language activists to ensure that the actual, what became to be the Senedd, or the Welsh Parliament, that it actually took responsibility for passing a Language Act. The Welsh language wasn't officially official in the 1993 Act, and all of the Welsh MPs, all of the Plaid Cymru and Labour MPs who voted against it. you know, it wasn't passed or they abstained or whatever. So it didn't have the support of the elected representatives from Wales. So after creating an assembly that then became a parliament, it was important for those elected members to take the responsibility to legislate about the language. It wasn't good enough to let it, you know, just rely on the 1993 Act that had been passed at Westminster, so it was important for them to do it. And so there was a lot of pressure during the 1990s, the first decade of the Welsh Assembly that became the Senate, to pass a Welsh Language Act, to declare the Welsh language official in Wales, finally. And so in one way, activists have moved on from that period. So in many ways, yes, it's not a perfect legal situation in terms of rights and so on. No, it's not. But a big chunk of what was expected has been accomplished through that act, symbolically at least, but also then through the work of the Welsh Language Commissioner. Not perfect, but it does mean that the foundations are much better than they were a decade or so ago.
Let me just say that's embodied by one minister, Conservative Minister for Wales, John Redwood, famously miming, if you remember, the Welsh national anthem there, and not knowing the words. And then William Hague, who did actually try and learn Welsh because of his wife, I don't know how far he got, but he did make more of an effort there. Sorry, another question from the floor. Richard.
Well, mae gelyn in ar ystad, so we have to be careful because the Sassni are everywhere. So what I wanted to ask is, you know, you talked about positive, and I come from Belfast, I come from a very different reality, and I remember 1998 that the Protestants, or people who identified as British, would piss into milk bottles and throw them at us whenever we were going to an Irish language school. And I wonder if it's time to be just as militant, to be just as aggressive. Because there's times where people say to me, no hablo catalán, doncs yo no parlo franquismo. You know, there's a reason, but there's a reason behind it. We have to be just as militant. I mean, last summer I had my my COVID vaccine, and I asked for the information in Irish if it was available, and I was told, please don't be that person. And so why don't you not be that person? Go to England if you love that language. Go there. Leave Ireland. Flan, I'll help you pack.
Sorry, so it wasn't available in Irish? It wasn't available?
It was available. The problem is they didn't print it out, and there was no... I mean, it's only this year we have the right to use Irish in the so-called United Kingdom. And it's sort of, well, what have we achieved? What was the point? You know, so my question is, do we have to be more militant? Do we have to be more aggressive, tiring, maybe?
I think it's, you know, I mean, you're talking about a very divided society across more than just the language, aren't you, when you're talking about 1998 in Belfast and so on. I think that people need to take responsibility, that's my view, about all kinds of things. You need to kind of, you know, call things out, don't you? I took part in a radio programme last week. All of a sudden, I was in a minority of people who thought that, you know, I thought that Kate Forbes's view on gay marriage was completely out of kilter with, you know, a tolerant and an equal society. But I had to call people out for being at least apologists, if not, you know, homophobic on the radio. But I think that we all have to take that responsibility, don't we? Wherever we are and whatever kind of injustice we see happening, we have to take that responsibility. We have to call it out. And I think that if we change part of our behaviours consciously in order to increase the vitality of our languages, then we have to do it. Because we can't say realistically that we can't speak English or Spanish or whatever it is, because we can. And we know that younger generations are able to speak it even better than previous generations. You know, when you hear older, even I can tell, you know, if I listen to older people speaking Catalan, I can hear that their Catalan is different from the Catalan of younger generations from the same place. We know that young people can speak Spanish just as comfortably, generally I know, but just as comfortably as they can speak Catalan. So there has to be a level of commitment, I think, about it. And sometimes that commitment means, you know, crossing a boundary that previously you wouldn't have been comfortable with, and now you have to be comfortable with. But that's also part of, you know, claiming the identity, because we never had, you know, the kind of milk bottles that you're talking about, but we know that there are people in our families and in our neighbourhoods who have been, you know, bullied and, you know, aggressed for speaking Welsh and for being, you know, being in favour of the language and so on. So it's not that perhaps the same level, but, you know, it's the same kind of experience that you need to claim, don't you?
Òscar, you have your milk bottles prepared?
To answer in short, I would say probably we don't need to be aggressive, but yes, we do need to be more militant. I just explained.
Peace-loving answer.
But be consistent in militancy for the language is what I said before, that we shouldn't change language.
Sorry, just somebody new to speak there. Mark there, and then...
Yeah.
No, it's okay. I think, yeah, we can do we have the microphone.
No, it's just in order to illustrate that, we need to mention the TikTok video today about the nurses in the hospital by the Broad. Okay, so 3 nurses, they are doing a video. One of them is explaining that in order to keep working there, to be at the hospital, she's from Andalusia, from Cádiz, and they are asking her to have the C1 level in Catalan. And she's telling, I'm not going to learn Catalan. Dressed as a nurse in a Catalan hospital. Behind there was a girl from the Basque country talking in Catalan and saying, yes, I will try to find a job here. And she said, shut up, because the video is just to say that I'm not going to learn Catalan.
The video in Spanish, of course. The video in Spanish, yeah.
Exactly. So it means that, yes, we need to be more the people that goes to the hospital and they want to speak in Catalan. They need to find people that they speak Catalan, not that they don't want to speak Catalan. So it's a problem that we need to sort it out.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark,
Hi there.
last question.
Yeah, my name is Mark. I'm president of Catalans UK. Question for both, because you mentioned before languages with linguistic similarities. So, you are Welsh and Celtic languages specialist. So I was wondering if there is dynamics between languages of the same root, maybe like Breton or the Scottish Gaelic or the Irish Gaelic, that you think can help out in the vitality of the language, like get closer relationship between languages that have similarities, and maybe in the Catalan side, whether that happens as well with the Occitan. It's partly official as well in Catalonia, but maybe further as well into southern France, whether there are dynamics and whether that helps. The language can always be a barrier, isn't it? You have to learn a new language, you know, even if it's quite closely, but could it be help on the vitality of these languages, Catalan and Welsh, to grow links with these languages?
Very briefly, both of you.
Yeah, I mean, there have been very long-standing relationships at activist level, but also at other levels as well, or, you know, perhaps what we might call the less militant activists between Wales and the Celtic countries. You know, we have close links with Brittany, for example, you know, even though we don't share a dominant language with them. Some of the important archives, Breton archives, are housed at the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth, for example. But there's a lot of sort of traffic over the years between the different Celtic countries, and there are sort of festivals and that kind of thing that bring people together. I think the one of the problems that I've always seen with too much reliance on the Celtic connection for Wales is that we're the big fish. Oh, we've got this in our language, you haven't got that. Oh, poor you. Oh, you've only got so many speakers, we've got 10 times more for you. You know, we end up being a little bit too complacent, and that's why I think it's been really important for Wales to have all these connections with Catalonia, with the Basque Country, and with other areas as well, where, you know, we're not the big fish in the smaller ponds.
Òscar, briefly.
I don't think it's an immediate advantage with having the Occitans. Besides, we have part of Catalonia whose native language is Occitan, but I don't think that influences in one or the other sense. And if it can have any positive influence, still should be from south to northward, because in the south both Catalan and Occitan have more recognition than in France. So in the sense that somehow France could learn from Spain, which is very I don't know. That could be a small influence, but not in the sense that it gives more vitality or more anything else.
Okay, with that, France learning from Spain,
Yeah.
and Wales learning from Catalan, I think we'll end there, and thank you again, Elin and Òscar, for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you.